A series of atmospheric rivers lining up in the Pacific. We're going to be tracking them with big impacts into our holiday travel. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods right here in the capital city of Sacramento. So we've got a big lineup, not only of storms, but of a lot of holidays as well. 9 days away from the winter solstice. And then we get into Christmas Day, 13 days away, 14 from Kwanzaa, and 20 to welcome in the new year. It's right about this time of the year that we usually start to see these storms impacting much of California. So this is a look at our atmospheric rivers, the water vapor in the air, and you can see how that counterclockwise circulation is really pulling in some of that moisture from down to the south of us. That usually feeds those storms with a lot of moisture and also the potential to deliver big rain and even sometimes snow as well. A low will be dropping down from the Pacific. It's going to shift that storm track, so we are going to start to see more of the impacts of these storms coming into California. Primarily, these have been hitting the Pacific Northwest, but now we're starting to see some of that changing as that storm track moves its way southward. Rain and snow will make a return. Snow level roughly about 6,000 to 7,000 feet, and this all starts up on Sunday, so the timeline has shifted slightly to a more aggressive start to this whole change to rain and snow across the west. Our statewide precipitation is still fairly low, so this is going to be a good shift for many of us. Timeline, not so great considering how much travel is going to be unfolding over the next couple of weeks. But again, we need to start putting some rain in the rain bucket here because most of the state is running at a deficit. And when you see the Sierra snow water equivalent, that too needs a lot of help at this point in the season. We're only at 39% of average to date for the northern Sierra, central Sierra 35%, and only 16% in the southern Sierra, on the heels of what was the biggest statewide average for the southern Sierra last season. So we're off to a very slow start. Statewide average, you see it right there, 32%. To date. Now, all that snow melts off and kind of meters into our summer months with filling our reservoirs, and everything's still looking good. As I mentioned, we saw the biggest snowpack in history in the southern Sierra, and so that helped to feed some of these reservoirs, still running about 120 to 130% of average. Even for the central Sierra, New Melones, Don Pedro, and San Luis, 100 to 150% of average. I wanted to show you just a couple of snapshots of some of our reservoirs, and you can see how water managers have to prepare for what has been a dry start to the season, but what looks like it is going to be a very wet end of December, beginning of January. So those reservoirs were sitting really full earlier in the year. They had to let water out, and so you can see how this line right here represents where we are right now for the 2022, 23, even now heading into 23, 24 season. This is the timeline right here. And so in preparation of some of the bigger rain and snow events, water managers start releasing that water here. This is very similar to another big El Nino year, 82, 83, where we happen to have a tremendous amount of flooding throughout the state of California. This is right here, our averages, and we'll try to follow this line here as best as possible throughout the course of our rainy season, hopefully preventing any catastrophic flooding, but also holding enough water for the time of the year where we need that water because we quite frankly don't get any rain events coming in. So that will be roughly from about May all the way through the end of September. Then we start to see a shift to more of those weather systems starting to head our way. So that was Shasta, our biggest reservoir in the state. We take a look at a smaller one, Folsom, and water managers have a tougher time with this because they just don't have the capacity to really play around with those numbers as much, because holding too much water can easily start to fill that reservoir, but not holding enough means we just don't have enough for the dry season. So this is a timeline of what things look like, same years here in comparison, 1982, 83, 22, 23. So we're going to shift that over pretty soon here to 23, 24 as we start to head into our next year. So again, we're going to be tracking those. They really had a lot of help from several atmospheric rivers heading in last year. It was one of the biggest water years we've had on record and the biggest for the southern Sierra. All the Sierra really benefited from multiple atmospheric rivers heading in. These are just big plumes of moisture that can either be largely beneficial or hazardous. This is what it looks like shaping up across the west, with the first line that's going to come in by the end of the weekend into early next week, largely in the green, yellow, and blue category. So we're going to be calling it on the scale here anywhere from an AR1 to AR3, both beneficial and hazardous. Some of the key factors that go into this and determining whether it's going to be beneficial or hazardous is the antecedent conditions. Are we looking at saturated grounds, full reservoirs, a big, huge snowpack, and are we going to get a rain event on top of a previous big snow event? So those are the types of things that we'll be watching with the previous dry conditions that we've been seeing over the past several days. We've got at least the capacity to hold some of that water right now. The storm track, though, is looking impressive. As we expand this across the Pacific, you can see we've got multiple systems starting to pick up right now, coming off of Japan and heading through the central Pacific here. And so we're going to start to see some of that storm track picking up those storms and carrying them directly into California, and that's why we need to track all of this. Now, in the background is that brewing super El Nino. We've got the weak trade winds and that warm water pushing up against South America that tends to deliver a wetter than average Southern California and most of the southern United States, slightly warmer than average through the Pacific Northwest. And it's something we will continue to watch. How are those two factors going to kind of intersect? A brewing super El Nino going on, a strong category, at least right now, and some of these atmospheric rivers. So what's the teleconnection between them? 35% of that continuing to be strong and potentially as strong as the 2015, 2016. You remember this term, Godzilla El Nino. That's just the latest predictions right there. You can see we're in that almost super category right here from November, December, January, falling off somewhat as we head through the spring months, I should say. This was the latest prediction out, October 2023. We're hoping to get that newest prediction out in the coming days. So we're just going off of the latest information that we have. Now, El Nino events actually happen quite frequently, believe it or not. These are some of the weaker and moderate events that we've seen. The strong events, you start to see that a little bit less numerous. And then our super El Ninos, only 3 times in the last 70 years that we've seen this. And sea surface temperatures are looking like they are starting to head into that category of above average by 2.0 degrees Celsius. So again, that's only happened 3 times in the past 70 years. So that equatorial Pacific really starting to become quite warm at this point, and it could mean we're heading into a situation where California looks very likely to get a wetter than average wet season. Now, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It's not like, oh, when we get a super El Nino, it's going to be super wet. You can see throughout the state in that 82-83 year, the entire state did see above average precipitation. Same for 97-98, just a little less so through the northern Sierra and central Sierra. And then we head into that Godzilla El Nino 2015-2016. Only the northern part of the state actually did well from that year. The southern part of the state ended up on the drier side. That's not necessarily the case on the previous 2 years. So since we've only had 3 of those super El Ninos in the past 70 years, it's a little hard to say if we're definitely going to see one of those events where we get abnormally high precipitation. Now, the latest forecast coming out from the CW3E, the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, shows that we have the potential to see some of that precipitation picking up over the 3-month period. That'll be our January, February, and March 2024. And it looks like that is falling in line, in fact, for what we're seeing even in that 8 to 14-day climate outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Likely warmer throughout the state, which means a slightly higher snow line with these storms, but also likely wetter. And if you notice that timeline, December 20th through the 26th, that's going to be a huge travel period, not only for Christmas, but also for New Year's as well. And the bullseye here is going to be right through the Central Coast through Southern California, a very key signature that would favor a super El Nino, statistically favorable wetter than average central and southern California, but really wet throughout the entire Pacific Northwest as well. Now, as we look at the 3-month precipitation outlook, this too is going to basically call for a very similar El Nino type of setup here, above average throughout the Pacific Northwest and then wetter than average throughout the southern part of the United States. So that first atmospheric river that we're going to be tracking into the holiday season starts up at the end of this weekend. So the beginning of the week looks really wet. Here comes the first signature, that counterclockwise circulation of the low, picking up that subtropical moisture, feeding us initially on Sunday with some lighter rain, and then the bigger event heads in on Monday. One thing that I do want to point out is we're largely seeing that higher snow line at about 7,000 to almost 7,500 feet periodically through the Sierra. Not horrible for travel because it means we're not going to be chaining up pretty low, but it does mean for some really messy travel through the Sierra and lots of changing conditions. Now, the second system that heads in gets a little bit better reinforcement from some cold air, and this one looks like it could drop that snow line down to about 6,000 to even in pockets about 5,500 feet. Lower snow line and a lot of chain controls up into the high country for the end of next week. Again, the timeline, December 22nd. I know a lot of people like to get a jump on their holiday travel. Now, if you're traveling through the Pacific Northwest, things are actually looking pretty good for Friday. On the back edge of that, that's where we get into that big storm lineup across the Pacific, which looks like it is going to give us more in the way of wet weather. The way that things are playing out right now on Christmas Day, so some lighter showers Christmas morning, Christmas Day, starting to see some heavier rain, and that gives us a pretty big rain and snow event into the middle of Christmas week. That is a lot to unpack, and we just don't have enough confidence on giving precise timeline and totals for that holiday week storm. But in the meantime, for the next 7 days, we're expecting about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of rain coming into the central part of California, more about 1.5 inches to 2 inches throughout the northern part of the state. Higher totals right here through the northwest coast, about 2.5 to 3 inches. That's going to get us some pretty good saturated ground, not entirely, so we can handle a little bit more. And I showed you the reservoirs. They can handle a lot of water coming in down the hill, but for only a certain period of time. This is going to be a lot to watch over the next week or so. Highs tomorrow, still dry, right around 40 for this year. Good day to get those errands done, 50s to near 60 down the hill. Also, do some yard work, clear out the gutters, get the storm drains cleared out, get all the winter prep ready to go. 60s along the coast and inland areas as well. We start off with patchy morning frost and fog, but then those afternoon highs are quite pleasant, right around 60 to 62 degrees. It's by the time we get into the weekend forecast that we start to see that change in the mountains, the foothills, and for the coast as well. So no matter where you're traveling really throughout Northern California, we are going to see the onset of that rain and snow coming our way. We're dry through Saturday, and then here comes the rain, and it takes us all the way through the end of that 10-day forecast and beyond. Again, confidence continues to build every single day, so you'll want to make sure to stay tuned right here and on our ABC 10 Plus streaming channel. There you can get these in-depth forecasts as well as weather specials, mega flood, water wasted, California drought series. It just kind of goes into the deeper dive about why these atmospheric rivers are so important, or the lack of them resulting in those drought conditions, and also the brewing super El Nino. We're continuing to update that as well. So download that. You can get it free on Apple TV, Roku, and Fire TV. And that's on our ABC 10 Plus app. We will be keeping you posted every time we get an update on the brewing, holiday impacts, and the atmospheric rivers on the way.